All right, it is 1 p.m. Welcome to our work session this Monday afternoon, May 3rd, on the SR&R. Let me first take roll and make sure all of our board members have their microphones working. Karen Keys-Gamara.
I'm here. Hello.
There. Good afternoon. Abrar Ramesh.
Hello.
Rochester Sizemore Heiser.
Hello.
Megan McLaughlin. I'm still waiting for Megan to join. Melanie Marin. Tammy Dearnock Kofax.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Hi there. Ricardi
Hi.
Anderson.
Hello.
Karen Corbett Sanders. Carl Frisch. So there's
Afternoon.
Laura Jane Cowan. Philip Akarski.
Hi, Ms. Tolan, I'm here, and Ms. McLaughlin just said she's having some issues logging on, but she is trying, will be here shortly.
Okay, let me just run through the names I missed earlier. I saw Melanie Marin come online. Hi there.
Hello, hi.
Okay, Megan's technical difficulties. Karen Corbett Sanders.
Ms. Tolan, she will now be with us.
Okay, thank you. And Laura Jane Cowan. All right, well, hopefully we'll hear from Laura Jane soon. Okay, so we do have, I guess, 9 members that are online currently, so we can go ahead and get started. Just a reminder that the work session today is on the SR&R. I want to give a huge thank you to Michelle Boyd and her team for reaching out and taking time to speak to almost all of the board members over the last week or so, gathering information and preparing for the meeting today. Thank you so much for doing that. Ms. McLaughlin, we see that you've just logged in with us.
Yes, I was having trouble with the link. Thank you.
Excellent, welcome. As we discussed at our last board meeting, since we did not have a chance to work with the changes we made to the SR&R a year ago, we are trying to keep changes this year to a minimum. As we talked at the board meeting also, we're looking forward to working with our new teams led by Dr. Boyd and Dr. Williams over the next year to look at data, trends, best practices in other divisions, et cetera, to determine if we need to make further in-depth changes as to what our SR needs to look like and the types of future changes we might want to make. There were lots of board comments and questions on the role of the SRO. And, as we discussed at the board meeting also, this will be discussed in much more detail in the future through a process. Karen Keys-Gamara, we know, has a forum topic coming forward around SROs, and, we will move ahead from there in an in-depth discussion around that topic at another date and over time. Today's work session is available to members to ask additional questions and clarify any changes to the draft SR&R that you will need to approve the SR&R to go into effect for next year. Voting to accept the SR&R will take place at our board meeting on June 17th, 2021. We'll follow our usual work session format today, with each board member having 3 minutes for questions or comments. And we'll have go backs of 2 minutes each if we require those after each board member has 3 minutes. So what we would like to do is first start out with a brief presentation from staff is to the changes that they've made and work that they've done since the board meeting and the presentation that they gave that. So let me turn it over at this point to Dr. Boyd. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I first want to really take the time to extend a sincere and huge thank you to all of the board members who took time to talk with us, to provide feedback. We know that there are many tasks on your plate, and the SR&R is just one of many things, but we sincerely appreciate your taking time to give us feedback, and in some persons who even indulged us in some follow-up calls for clarification. So want to say thank you, and we appreciate the ongoing collaboration, and know that this is just the beginning and that we'll still have work to do following our discussion on today. But thank you so much for your collaboration and input. We'll go ahead and begin as we go to the next screen. We wanted to have a few items on our agenda for today. The first thing we want to do is to review some things that we were able to ascertain via our dialogue with individual board members on their thoughts about the SR&R and what things may need to be tweaked. Again, as Ms. Tolan shared in our opening, we have not had an opportunity to fully implement the SR&R on this year due to the impact of COVID, but we know that there was some things that board members wanted to highlight and wanted us to take a look at. So we'll talk about those things. Next, we'll look at the revisions that we have made and are proposing to make within the document. We posted on today some documents, a couple of documents for your review. One, we posted an updated red line. That red line has some of the changes that will be highlighted here. But the second document is probably the more comprehensive document, where we've incorporated the listing of the recommendations and the feedback that we received and the proposed revisions into the SR&R based on those discussions. Again, we will ensure that the updates are incorporated into the red line, but that table, that recommendations document is probably the piece that will give you the most insight as to upcoming changes and things that are under discussion. Following the review of those key revisions from things, we'll talk about some next steps, review our updated SR&R timeline, and certainly we'll give the floor back to you for board discussion, feedback, and questions of staff. As we move forward, we want to talk about the 5 things that really came across pretty consistently as we engaged in conversation with you as board members about the SR&R. The first one, and it's no surprise, we talked about it at the last meeting, but was really that emphasis on the need for consistency and implementation of these students' rights and responsibilities across our school division. We know that we are a very large school division, the biggest in Virginia, and as such, we have a number of administrators, not only principals, but assistant principals and DSS that are responsible for implementing and monitoring the SR&R, but also the multitude of teachers, staff, whether it's bus drivers, instructional assistants, that have to carry out these tasks. And so with all of those personnel, we need to really make sure that there's consistency in what we're doing with the SR&R. So we'll talk about some steps that are proposed to address that theme. The second theme is to ensure supports are provided so that all key stakeholders really understand the information contained in the SR&R. The student rights and responsibilities contains a lot of technical language, even with us trying to really streamline that language, just the basis and the nature of the document is technical. We know that we provide the translations into a variety of languages for our families, but one of the things that we want to do is to really make sure, make sure we're providing that orientation that's going to be beneficial and informational to all key stakeholders. And when I say all key stakeholders, I'm referring to students, our families, our staff, and our administration. So we will talk about that a little bit more detail in a moment. The next piece that was a resounding thing was eliminating that discretionary language relative to information being shared with law enforcement. As Ms. Tolan shared at the beginning, we know that the board will be taking up the SRO MOU in a separate forum following Ms. Keys-Gamar's forum topic. But we know that there are some things now that we wanted to clarify so that there is no ambiguity as as it relates to what information should be shared with law enforcement. The fourth thing was to identify needed changes to the SR&R as it relates to the upcoming change in legislation that will be effective on July 1 regarding the legalization of marijuana. We really want to make sure that there's not a disparate impact on students, and that we can be as supportive as possible with students and minimizing their interaction with law enforcement to the greatest degree possible in alignment with the code, and really minimizing exclusionary practices to the greatest degree possible. And again, that'll be fleshed out momentarily. And the fifth one is really more of an overarching theme that really speaks to a number of specific points that you pointed out in our discussion. And it's really around fostering a caring culture to ensure that historically marginalized groups are not unintentionally adversely impacted by our practice or lack of our clarity within this document. So we'll take time to unpack these 5 themes. And again, these are some of the overarching things based on your feedback. There are certainly, as you can see in our document, a number of other revisions that were made, but these were the 5 things that really stood out across almost all board member discussion. As we move to our next slide, we will first begin to unpack our first theme, and again, that's consistency and implementation with the SR&R. We know that we are reviewing this document and we're making some revisions to clarify the language in the document, but we all understand that we can't write our way into consistency of implementation. That the key piece around ensuring that this document is a living, breathing document and implemented with fidelity across our number of schools is through professional development, orientation, family training, student training. All of those key stakeholder groups have to have this information and in a way where it's digestible to them. So we want to be able to, and you'll see that this item is listed as being in progress. What we want to do, what we're proposing is that we collaborate with various stakeholder groups to enhance our SR&R orientation. So really sitting down with administrators, talking about what our current practice is, but what we might need to do to enhance, to ensure that they are positioned and understand and have the resources to fully implement the SR&R. Likewise, we want to be able to talk with our families. We have some ideas about what might be beneficial in helping our families to understand the SR&R, but the only way to truly know how to help our families is to do what? Ask our families what it is that they need. So we want to be able to engage in that two-way conversation. And likewise, to be able to talk with our staff. We know that we have, again, a number of staff. So it's not just teachers and instructional assistants. We have a number of adults that are charged with the supervision of our students throughout the day. And so we really want to unpack that to ensure that everyone, each staff person, has an understanding of their role as it relates to creating this safe and caring culture for which teachers can teach and students can learn. Next, the other piece, as we talk about implementation, again, is understanding, and that's our definitions. Again, we know we have a lot of technical language in our SR&R, and some of that is code-driven, but we've really tried to add some key definitions to the glossary so that everyone, as we read the document, will have the same understanding of what a word means when it's used in this context. So you'll see that we've added a number of definitions, and I'm sure that there may be some additional ones that we need to add, and we certainly look forward to getting that feedback. But you'll see that we've listed in parentheses for your reference a couple of words that we've added. And again, this is illustrative and not exhaustive as to what definitions were added. And last but not least is looking at the difference between shall and should. As we stand up and want to promote clarity and consistency in practice and implementation, those two words, as small as they may seem, are really big, a really big distinction. Shall meaning we must do it, we have to do it. Should meaning it's recommended. And so again, we want to take as much ambiguity out of the process for our administrators who are trying, and our teachers and students and families who want to know what they're expected to do and how to respond. And so we want to be as clear as possible. So that says in progress. We've made some adjustments, but we're going to go back through again to look at each time should is referenced in the SR&R. Is that the appropriate term, or should it be shall? As we move to looking at our second theme, And you'll see on this screen, and I'll preference it, and you might be thinking Michelle made an error on the slides. We didn't make an error, but these two themes are just so jointly coupled. So before we talked about consistency and implementation, and here we talk about understanding the information that's contained in the document. And really, you can't have one without the other. So here you'll see the same things listed here, but this is making sure on the first slide, we talked about the implementation. So that was really more or less for how our administrators and our staff apply the SR&R. But here now we're talking about all our stakeholder groups, and that those same pieces of information are key so that our students truly understand what's expected of them, what rights they have, and that they know in advance how the division would respond. Likewise, it's important for our families to have that same understanding, as we know that it's very, very important to have that homeschool communication and partnership to be able to support our students. So I won't read that slide in detail as we've just unpacked it, but those two themes really, really go hand in hand. As we look at our third thing on the next slide, it's to eliminate the discretionary language as it relates to law enforcement. This section of the SR&R is very dense, and it can be easily misinterpreted. And so we want to make some adjustments to really clarify it for all stakeholders. So as it relates to law enforcement, we really want to highlight that where it references reporting information to law enforcement in a number of our sections of the SR&R, it's referring to reporting acts that may constitute a felony offense. And so one of the things that we want to do is we first want to bold that piece so that it jumps out to everyone who is reading the document, but then also being very, very explicit and ensuring that we explicitly incorporate into the document that we would be expecting that administrators would get guidance from our division counsel as to what acts would constitute a felony, because we know we have educators and administrators in the building, and that may not be something that persons automatically know what would constitute a felony, and there are such unique nuances. And that's something that the staff have done in practice, but we really want to memorialize it by putting it in writing, because we want to make sure that staff know which resource they should use in clarifying this piece, as we do not want, and they shall not, and I intentionally use shall not seek that information from law enforcement officers. So we will be incorporating that into the SR&R. And then again, you will see us clarifying the shall versus should very explicitly as it relates to reporting information to law enforcement. As we go to our fourth thing, many of you may be aware, but on July 1, there will be new legislation regarding the legalization of marijuana in Virginia for persons who are 21 and older. And there's a number of nuances around, a number of caveats around that new legislation. But one of the things that we plan on doing, and we've already begun that process, is that council is reviewing the state code to determine what flexibility or autonomy we may have as a school division and you as a board to make some changes and adjustment to our SR&R as it relates to marijuana-related offenses. And again, it's not that we're promoting or endorsing the use of marijuana, but we're looking at this to ensure that we are not having exclusionary practices beyond that which we need to have, and also so that our students are not, again, connected to law enforcement in situations where that is not required. So council is engaging in that review. And the second piece I've kind of already jumped into just a little bit, but we want to have additional communication with a number of stakeholders to determine what changes would be appropriate that would be permissible by code for us to really make some revisions to our SR&R based on this new legislation. And again, this information, it goes into effect July 1. We know that we want to make sure that we've cleared that up as our new SR&R is implemented for the 21-22 school year. But we know that this is a huge piece. This is very significant. So again, we want to make sure that we get stakeholder feedback. And I know that in our discussions with you, we were able to really glean where you want to go as a school board and generally as individual members, I should say. But there was pretty much some pretty consistent consensus around us wanting to make sure there wasn't that over criminalization as it relates to marijuana as we talk with various members. Looking at our final theme, and we're almost done, so I know there's great, we're anxious to have that discussion, is fostering our caring culture around groups that historically have been marginalized, and again, not intentionally, but sometimes what are those unintended outcomes? And so some of the things that we've done, and again, based on your feedback, is really highlighting hate speech, and wanted to note that the response to hate speech ranges from level 1 to level 4, that it's really outlined what hate speech is in the SR&R lessons and other opportunities. But we also want to incorporate some additional language as it relates to other groups in other sections of the SR&R. We'll talk about that as we go through the discussion with you on this afternoon. The next piece is support for our families who may be immigrants, and really determining there was a desire to see if we could adopt, develop a policy or to mirror some protections in alignment with the county's trust policy. So how do we, again, make sure that we're supporting students and creating that safe and caring culture as it relates to release of information and things of that nature. And finally, release of directory information, clarifying, and we've added language that persons can opt out of having that directory information released. And again, making sure that we're informing families so that there's no ambiguity, and making sure that persons aren't uncomfortable in these situations. So we've highlighted those 5 things. And again, those are just the overarching sentiments that were communicated from a number of board members. And the document that was posted to board docs lists each specific feedback and the response to that. So on our next steps, we are looking forward to receiving additional feedback from you on today. And we know that we may also engage in some subsequent conversations based on the discussion today. Again, collaborating with various stakeholder groups around the orientation for students, staff, and families, and also collaborating around the new legislation around the legalization of marijuana. And finally, finalizing the updates that are listed as in progress, bringing those documents, that information from the recommendations table into the red line so that they're memorialized there in the SR&R. Our timeline as we move forward, so we've had an opportunity on the next slide, you'll see on the next slide, we've had an opportunity to present the information, the initial information to you on the 22nd of April. We had this opportunity for discussion and additional updates on today. And as Ms. Tolan said at the beginning, we're scheduled for action from the board on June 17th. And at this time, that concludes our updates. And again, thank you for your time. And we look forward to your input and your questions and discussion with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boyd. Okay, at this point in time, I see 2 of our board members have their hands up. Why don't we start with Karen Keys-Gamara, followed by Mr. Frisch.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. I appreciate the collaboration and the opportunity to speak with you a couple of times regarding this. And as you know, we're always learning about what students' experiences are. And so I want to highlight just a few things that I didn't get an opportunity to discuss with you. I know I mentioned the need to be very specific about the use of social media and our digital resources. I recently learned that there are new apps that actually allow people to locate and find fellow students, in addition to concerns with respect to the transfer of images and sexting and things of that nature. In my work, the combination of those 2 things could lead to some pretty significant concerns. And so I wanted to make sure that I mention that in particular about the ability to, if I forget the name of the particular app, I will get that to you. But this particular one would allow students who were communicating in these chat rooms to be able to follow those students and figure out where they are and meet those people, whether they want to be met or not, which suggests to me that not only do we need to clarify that, but this also needs to be included in that intersectionality we talked about with respect to how we're talking about the responsible use of our digital resources. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. The other thing that I know is of particular concern right now, because there have been higher numbers of certain groups of students who have chosen to be virtual, who may need much more nudging with respect to participating and going back to school. I'm concerned about absenteeism and how that may impact our students and how we can communicate to make sure that we're addressing those particular concerns. The other concerns I have, I think we did talk about with respect to disproportionality for, how we can have the particular suspensions for longer periods of time. For example, vaping 2 days versus 10 days. Again, there's the educational piece that needs to happen, but also where would the language be to make sure that we understand the difference between those. And I'll take a breath, give you an opportunity to respond. And I think I have just a few comments after that.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. That was helpful. Thank you so much for sharing the information regarding the apps. I think that is something, and the use of technology, particularly now, we know that we're hoping that we'll be more in person and we'll be able to put away some of the technology, but we know that technology is here to stay. And from conversations with you and other persons, and even as we work with, our discipline office, we know that social media can become a world of its own. Many things happen in cyberspace. So we'll make sure that we're incorporating those things in that language and providing details so that students are safer, but also that they're clear about what our expectations are when they're using FCPS devices, FCPS internet, and all of those things. But again, even beyond just what happens within our walls and within our supervision, just making sure overall that students are educated and informed, even when they're on their personal Wi-Fi's at homes, iPhones, all those good things for the educational piece. So we'll work on that. And the absenteeism, again, we're in our document, that was a question that came up a couple of times about unexcused absences. And even with respect to the age confines, we know that compulsory attendance is 5 to 18. But we want students, if they're in school, even beyond 18, we want to highlight the importance of being in school and the reason for being in school. So making sure that our staff are continuing to follow up. And even for our students who are engaged virtually, I know we have the discussion on tomorrow. We're excited that the expectation is that the majority of our students will be in person, but we also know that on next year, we will have students that are engaging virtually, and how we engage with them, make sure that they're not only present in terms of checking the attendance box, but also that they're engaged in terms of the instructional process. So we'll follow up on that and find out if we need to have any additional language included, particularly as it relates to virtual attendance with that regard. And vaping, that is a huge one. And not just the vaping, but on some of our infractions that could be level 1 through level 4 responses, there's a huge difference in the response that an administrator can select and an intervention that they can select. So again, we'll have to provide some professional development because some of those nuances just make things so different. But we don't want something that's just first time offense, minor impact for a student to be going before the superintendent and things like that if it's something that's not required by code. So I say all that to say that I think that our orientation for those stakeholders is going to be key in so much of that, because many of our infraction codes span multiple levels.
Absolutely. And just to add to the concern regarding the use of our digital resources, I think it's also important to clarify where, an infraction on school property can meet something that's happening not off school property and how students can be impacted by that. I think specifically with our social media resources, etc., that line can be blurred very easily, and parents in particular need to understand. I certainly think we need to have a partnership with our parents so that they do understand that these resources can lead to some additional.
I don't see.
So I do have additional, just one other comment, but I will respect the bell. I think that was for me.
It looks like Dr. Presidio may have something you wanted to add.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Cullen. Just in response to Ms. Keys-Gamarra's comments about the safety and security issues related to electronics and electronic communication. I do want everybody to just be reminded of the fact that we have a very comprehensive digital citizenship curriculum that we use throughout Fairfax County. Much has been developed by our own internal team, but also we use the Common Sense Media digital citizenship curriculum as well. And we train students on responsibilities and safety as well, thinking about things like personal safety, appropriate communication. So a lot of the proactive training work that we do with students is part of our digital citizenship curriculum, which teachers are required to be trained on, and it's updated every year. And we also do family sessions, and we've continued to do those throughout this school year as well, to educate families on the responsibilities and the risks around students using media appropriately. So we can always do more in that regard, but there is a lot of work that's currently in place that our schools are doing proactively around the appropriate use of digital media and electronic communication.
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that kids understand when they can get in trouble, specifically in the SRNR. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. First, I want to thank everybody for their work on this draft, especially the work done to reflect gender neutrality throughout the document. I think that's a great step forward. I have a couple questions about outing, dead naming, and misgendering. And just so that we're all on the same page, I'll offer some basic definitions. Outing is when a person's sexual orientation or gender identity are disclosed without their consent. Dead naming is when someone uses the former name of a transgender or gender expansive person. And misgendering is when someone refers to a person using a word, typically a pronoun, that does not correctly reflect the gender with which they identify. So with that context, I'm curious your thoughts, and I apologize for not thinking to bring this up with you during our call in advance, but I'm eager to hear your thoughts on what we can do with the SRNR to further update it so that we reflect the rights of transgender and gender expansive students per FCPS regulations, especially when it comes to affirming their right to be called by their chosen name and proper pronouns.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Frisch, for that feedback. And also thank you for proactively defining all those terms. I think that that's just so important. And I'm going to let Deb Scott, she and I had an opportunity to talk this morning after we discussed this question. So she'll provide some details. But I think part of the information, as we talk about our regulation 2603 and the orientation that we do with staff, so that people understand what those terms mean and the implications of doing those things. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. But Deb, go ahead and weigh in response to Mr. Frisch's question. And then Dr. Williams may want to have some information to add on as well.
I believe when I was talking with Dr. Boyd this morning, we can do a little bit more within the SRNR to make sure that the codes that the VDOE has described in the charts are also in our narrative, and also that we list regulation 2603 as one of those regulations that we're looking at when we consider the SRNR, and also when we consider the training and the professional development and the lessons to students past the actual document. we could consider some of those definitions to make it even clearer that those are definitions that are directly involved in our work with and are needing to honor transgender and gender expansive youth. So we could consider that as well. Those are some of our first thoughts as to how we meld those regulations together. You will notice at the back of the SRNR, there are several regulations that we try to meld language into the actual SRNR when it makes sense.
Right. It's one of the things that gave me the idea. I would say that I doubt many students end up reading any of our regulations or policies as a result of reading the SRNR, unless they get in trouble, maybe. So I look forward, I'm glad we have a few more weeks to address this, and hopefully we can address including some of the rights that are outlined in the regulation. I'd also like to make sure that we include something in the rights generally affirming all LGBTQIA folks' right not to be outed. On the subject of hate speech, what can we do to address the purposeful outing or malicious dead naming or misgendering of transgender and gender expansive students? I see the work, and thank you for doing this, under leveled responses to student behaviors, section category C on page 17. That seems like the logical place to put something like that. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well.
Yes, I think anytime we can give examples, then our staff and our students both know, because you're right, where our families, students, and staff are going to go more often is to the charts and the shorter version and not into the narrative. I might let Dr. Boyd and Dr. Williams speak to, because as you can hear me always answer this question, it's really beyond this document what we do for educational instructional purposes. So they may talk a little bit about that. But I, for one, will be entering this into the review of the SRNR and why these terms are important and their impact on students.
And I would just underscore that it's not just the terms, right? And you've done a lot of great work on this, that it's the execution of that regulation and letting students know what their rights are under these rules.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. And I think Dr. Williams wants to add something, and then go ahead, Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and tag in and offer a framing that I think is really important in this conversation. And we talk about it a lot in the equity space, but it's directly applicable here. And that is intent versus impact. Because for those of us who just heard dead naming, and certainly outing is more popularized in the culture, misgendering, some people are Googling right now to figure out what those things are, right? So if a student is involved in one of those actions and they don't know what they don't know, then certainly our response should be one where we are doing that work to build that cultural competency for inclusion, as opposed to purposefully weaponizing, which is akin to bullying. So we have structures in place for that, but we also have to have the nuanced understanding of not dumping every behavior in one bucket and then applying a response. So I would offer.
I completely agree. I completely agree that the intent totally matters and the impact of the usage. What I fear is a document that doesn't specifically spell these out, because this is, when you talk to LGBTQIA plus students, this is the issue, right? They are dead named. They are misgendered regularly, sometimes maliciously, and just pointing to, trying to rely on different pieces of the SRNR to seek their grievances doesn't necessarily cut it. Having it spelled out as, when this happens to me, this is what happens, I think is a good way of doing it. So I'll look forward to having more conversations about that. Thank
Carl,
you.
let's take your feedback. We'll take your feedback back with the team and see what we can do. As you said, we've got a few weeks here before this comes back to the board.
All right. Appreciate it.
Mr. Frisch, are you done?
I thought I heard the bell.
Nope.
No? Oh my goodness.
No,
wonderful.
did we have our bell?
I'm sorry. Yes, we did. We have the bell.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laura.
All right, thank you.
I missed that. Okay, I'll put you down for go back. Dr. Anderson?
Okay, I got confused there. Bell or no bell? I missed it too, Call. First of all, thank you, Dr. Boyd, for all of this great work. I really genuinely appreciate this approach where we're trying to get in front of the feedback rather than behind it. Couple of questions that I had and then some comments I wanted to share. I noticed that on page 8, the discussions regarding the directory talked about opting in. It talked about opting out. I wonder what space there could be for opting in instead, because that means that families are making an intentional choice to be included, rather being included by maybe forgetting to opt out. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. We can certainly discuss this information with counsel just to make sure there's no code or any legal stipulations and talk about how we will operationalize that. But I certainly understand what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is some folks may, just as we all know, in the hustle and bustle of parenting, just so many things you may forget that I want to opt out. And so would it be more appropriate to say I'm actively saying you can release that information versus assuming that I'm okay with the information being released?
Right, that's exactly what I'm saying, because I, as a former principal, I've gotten the same feedback with parents regarding family life education, where, oh my goodness, I forgot the form, but I didn't want my child to engage in this. But the opting out, it's just something that I would love for consideration. And just kind of broader picture, one of the things that I noticed in all the documents were some references to the trust policy in terms of mirroring. And I know I shared this with you in my feedback with you, mirroring what the county is doing. Tomorrow, actually, Mr. Frisch and I will be presenting a forum topic to that end. And I believe I sent the documents to staff last week, but if I didn't, I will be sure to do that again, where we are asking for the governance. The ask is for governance committee to take a look at looking at a policy for our jurisdiction. And I wonder, is there a space here for all of you who are working on the SRNR, if and when the board decides that this will go forward, to partner on that work, since much of it is showing up right now and the feedback and some of the documents that you've posted?
Certainly, we'd be happy to do that and support that.
Okay, well, Mr. Frisch, as governance chair, just please be sure that you're listening to that if we happen to move to that next step. One of the other things that I noticed as well, I think this was on page 5, you talked about the procedures and distribution, and I saw some language there regarding printing the SRNR. I was under the impression that printing the SRNR is only per request. It's not as if the booklets are sent to schools anymore. Is that changing? I think I'm a little bit confused by what I'm reading.
Deb, do you want to clarify that piece regarding the print access for families and for schools?
I was under the impression that
access.
I'm so sorry. Are you asking me to clarify? I missed it.
No, ma'am. I was asking Deb Scott to respond to your question. I'm sorry.
We do not print a copy for each student anymore. So you are correct in that. We do have it available online. We do print some copies in reserve so that we will make sure we'll be able to hand a copy out if a parent so requests. So the hard copies are by request.
And are those hard copies translated as well in all of the languages that the most frequent languages that we have in Fairfax?
Yes, we try to make a guesstimate on the hard copy of how many we would need based on school population. So we do some calculations behind the scenes. You also can use QR codes on the online for translations, but yes, everything's translated into I think it's 7 most used languages besides.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I want to spend some time on is the earlier comment that you made, Dr. Boyd, which is we can't really just write our way out of the issues that we are presented with when it comes to the SRNR, that focus on implementation, making sure everyone's involved. Can you tease that out a little bit in terms of that? What would that entail? Is it similar to those classes that Dr. Presidio shared have taken place with the other thing that he just mentioned, give me a little bit of a better sense of what that would look like for our teachers, for our principals, and for our parents.
Sure. So we know that the SRNR is going to be critical because it's our guide, it's our framework. But as Mr. Frisch shared, and even if we think back to what the booklet was called when we were in school or when your children were in school, it's not commonplace for kids to read the SRNR, whatever the division calls it, from cover to cover. As shared, when this document comes alive, it's after the fact, it's when it's too late. And even as parents with good intentions, we have a lot of things to do. So between cooking and doing laundry and trying to help with homework, when do you have time to read a 68, 70-page document? So with that, we know that, regardless of how many languages we translate the document into, this alone will not be enough. Inevitably, something will happen, and families and students will legitimately say, I don't know, and really just did not know. So what I'm proposing, and again, it's, we have a lot of discussion to happen with stakeholders, because we can't assume we know what people need, but that we would need to do something beyond print. So might that be some family orientation workshops that are just quick little things that people can click play. So while you're cooking dinner, you're listening to this. How do we make it so that it's digestible for students, where it's, we know that we provide information and training for our students, but how can we make it more bite-sized and meaningful and really highlight those things that our data indicate have really been stumbling blocks for our students, and even for our staff? How do we make sure that we put it in bite-sized pieces? So they're lesson planning, they're disaggregating data, they're calling families, there's just all these things to do. So when do they have time to sit down and read cover to cover the SRNR? So really wanting to talk with them about what are pieces that you need. And even with our administrators, we know that the law enforcement piece, you have to really, really read that paragraph. And some of you all know, because we read it back and forth and called you back, text you back. When we go through that information to unpack it, and in the throes of the day-to-day in school, we know that our administrators, there's so many things going on. They don't have time to just pause and just highlight, read. So how can we make that more simple in discussion and scenarios and things like that? So I think that it's this work in the document is critically important, but the piece that I think is equally important is that orientation piece. And that's why we really want to make sure that we have the opportunity to dialogue with those different stakeholders, because one without another, I don't think that that'll get us where we want to go.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. I think that's really key. And when we also talk about disproportionality, when it comes to our staff, it's really important that that piece be included. So it's not just an awareness of what is expected, but also the preventative measures that could be taken. This may not be a popular thing to say, but I know in my experience, when you take a look at a school's discipline data, it always converges into a very small group of personnel. And so I think was that my bell? I'm so sorry, I can't hear it.
Yes,
was that
apologies, it was the bell again, yes.
If we could just turn that up a little higher, I'm totally missing it and I thought I was wrong. So I will stop here, and please put me down for a go back, Ms. Tolan, so I could wrap up that piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Yeah, we need our bell to be a little longer so we can catch it. Ms. McLaughlin.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the comments my colleagues have shared so far on a number of these issues. I first want to ask a question to John Foster. John or Scott, the prior boards, we worked really hard to get a summary document that was going to be layperson language, very easy to read, sort of a highlight of the SRNR. And I don't see any reference to it here. And I appreciate what all of our staff are saying and board members are saying, but we had this in the past. Where did it go?
This is John Foster, Ms. McLaughlin. There is a chart, as was discussed in the SRNR, that summarizes the consequences for various types of conduct. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, or if there's another document in addition to that you were
Sure.
referring to?
The prior versions, there was the 72 page on the one side. And then if you flipped it over, it actually gave you like student, parent, helpful handbook that sort of gave you more layperson terminology, layperson language. And it might have had some charts in it, but maybe some of my other colleagues who served with me during that time can speak to this, but I don't want to lose my time today, but I'll follow up with staff, but that is a document we did have, and it was really useful because, as I shared with Dr. Boyd in our conversation, 72 pages with mostly legal technical language is not an accessible SR&R. And so I don't want us to miss an opportunity, which I thought was a really great improvement in recent years.
We'll go back, Ms. McLaughlin, take a look at that. I do remember that discussion. I don't remember what the final document looked like, but if we put it in before, that's something we can certainly look at putting back in. I think we just have to be clear, whatever it is a summary, and whatever that is, people will need to go to the larger text. That's probably the only piece, but we'll follow back up between now and next month.
Great, thank you.
So, excuse me, Megan. Deborah Scott, did you have information on that? I saw your hand up there briefly.
Sorry, I do, but I didn't want to take Ms. McLaughlin's time. But yes, we have the family guide. We have quick guides for students. So we have a lot of those supporting documents as well, but we certainly will take a look at them, and we take a look at them every year to make sure that they're more understandable. So we absolutely take your comment, Ms. McLaughlin, but they do exist.
Yeah, they're not posted on the website, Dr. Brabrand, and I think the board really would have benefited from seeing what those look like too, so we can also help the public.
And you know what? We'll put up what we have between now and next month so the new board members can see it. As you said, this was something a couple of years ago, and we'll see if we need to make any tweaks based on the changes that we have before the board now.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question I still have for John Foster, and it has to do with the freedom of speech case coming before the Supreme Court, because it really captures Ms. Keys-Gamarra's and mine, and I'm sure many others' concerns that how do we balance out making sure that we create a safe, caring community, but also recognizing that we don't want to over criminalize and have our school system getting involved in things that happen outside of school that really needs to involve families and working with each other on this, rather than now it's become under the jurisdiction of the schools for punishment. And for anybody watching, in that case, the young lady was using vulgar language, but it wasn't, I mean, the stakes were very high in terms of how the Pennsylvania school chose to punish her. And I do worry about that component of student discipline and the jurisdictional authority of schools versus jurisdictional authority of families and parents to deal with that sort of thing when kids get on social media and use swear words. So, John, is that concerning at all to us as we develop SR&R? Is that if the Supreme Court makes a decision, will we, then have to do some revisions or consider revisions?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. McLaughlin. We're just going to have to wait and see how the court rules. And I would not recommend that the board, delay or hold off on moving forward with its work on the SR&R, because it's just so hard to predict where the Supreme Court could land. As you noted, the facts of that particular case, they're pretty limited. And because of that, the one outcome could be a fairly narrow decision that does not provide a lot of broad, deeper guidance to school systems, but we just don't know at this point. And so my recommendation is the board proceed forward with its work. And when the opinion comes down, we can review it at that time and determine if there's any additional steps that the board needs to take.
Great.
The one thing I'd add, Ms. McLaughlin, from everything I can read, it looks like it'll be a late June, early July. That still gives us another month or month and a half. And as Deb Scott said, you know, the work is virtual now for our SRNR. So we could make a tweak and bring it to the board either in July or the latter part of August if we needed to make a major change. As John said, Mr. Foster said, it could be a very, very narrow ruling. But at the same time, this is one of the first student speech cases before the Supreme Court in really a generation. So it could be a significant difference around how schools interface around this issue of free speech. So whichever way it goes, we think we will have time to make any necessary pivots to the training of our teachers and administrators prior to the beginning of the school year.
Great, thank you. I do, before I lose any more time, want to just spotlight something that Dr. Anderson said. I really appreciate her concerns on the opt-in versus the opt-out of student directory, but I have worked with our PTAs for a number of years, and I worry that we know from the history of families answering surveys and families opting in versus opting out, I can't at this time support doing an opt-in approach. I have real concerns about that, because the directories serve a really valuable purpose for our community and family connections and engagement.
Thank you. Ms. Cohen?
Thank you so much. I will just say, I know a lot of schools in the last couple of years actually went to an opt-in format. So it'd be interesting to see what their participation rate has been in shifting to that. It was definitely a big mindset shift from a PTA perspective to try to deal with that way. But there were a few reasons why I know several, at least locally here, went to it. So that would be an interesting kind of follow-up conversation. To Dr. Boyd, my first question, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to get to be part of the equity stakeholder group. And I wondered if you could give us a little insight of what their role in the development of the SRNR changes might be. And if it wasn't much this year, then kind of maybe how do you perceive it going forward?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Great question. So this year, again, we propose very minimal changes. Our stakeholder collaboration will be around those two big things, the marijuana and the orientation. So we'll certainly make sure that we have a very diverse stakeholder group. We have partnered with Dr. Williams, since she's come, we have had some conversations, and I know prior to her arrival, other persons in her shop had been partnering with various persons from DSS. I think that's going to be, well, not I think, I know that will be a really, really key focus for us as we're doing all of our work to make sure that we're approaching it with that really, really open lens. There were a number of things that, Mr. Frisch brought up on today and other persons on today that we want to make sure is at the forefront of our mind. And Dr. Williams and her team certainly provide a breadth of information and experience regarding that. And again, making sure that we're not out of good intentions having poor outcomes with some things that we might incorporate. And so certainly I want to give Dr. Williams an opportunity to provide any additional details or input with that regard, but we're certainly appreciative of her feedback and her team's feedback and insight, and we'll continue to seek that.
And I won't belabor the point except to say that what we know is that the research is pretty clear that we tend to look at different bodies and make different judgments, which in part lead to the phenomenology of overrepresentation. As in this conversation, we talk about nuance and how we deal with nuance, because even if it is not an infraction per se, it could be a learning opportunity. And so as Dr. Boyd continues to do this work, certainly we will partner to interrupt some of those disparities that are known, and certainly not create additions as we try in our best intentions to make a more holistic document.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It was pretty eye-opening, I think, to get to be a part of that group and see exactly as you said, that different things impact all of us very differently, and to get to actually hear that from people who are invested in it makes an awfully big difference. And nuance is awfully important in what we do. My next question is about support to administrators. A few years when we changed, I think absolutely in the right direction, with how we dealt with first-time marijuana infractions. There was definitely some feedback from our schools community that it was great. I mean, that was a really welcome change, but then we didn't really do the wraparound support that we probably needed to in terms of getting more physical bodies in a building to be able to monitor what became a pretty heavily loaded in-school suspension system with that infraction. So do you anticipate any of the changes that you see coming forward needing to have, as we walk into budget pretty soon here, do you see anything that we need to be aware of in helping support the schools, support the SRNR?
Again, I go back to those two big pieces with the stakeholder orientation and whatever adjustments we make regarding the legalization of marijuana. We're in our infancy stages of collaborating with council, as we comb through all of the nuance around the codes and what latitude we have as a school division for you all as a board. So it's probably too early for me to say on that end, because again, we want to make sure that we have that education component too. There's a piece of wanting to make sure that kids that the sanction isn't significant, but we also want to make sure that there's an educational piece and supporting healthy living and good decisions and those type of things as well. And around the orientation, at present, I don't see budget implications for that. However, again, we still have to engage in some two-way conversation with those various stakeholder groups. So there may be some recommendations put forth from that group that we haven't thought of that would have budget implications, but we will be sure to share that information as quickly as possible for those discussions.
That's helpful. Thank you. And it was like you were reading my next question, which is, that's one piece I noticed is when we tried to really work to do some education and almost restorative model, especially when it came to hate speech. I think there were conversations about, it was almost seen as an end. So if a kid, called someone something that was racially insensitive, we sent them to some sensitivity training, some cultural competency training, but it felt like that was the end. And then if there was another infraction, obviously there were disciplinary consequences, but there wasn't kind of, again, to use the term wraparound, there wasn't follow through after those classes. So I wonder, how is the system, how can we further engage and keep that conversation going, that it's not you call somebody that you get caught and, your only consequence, which is what, I think some of our kids would say, is just going to this class and then you're done. How do we further embrace that? Man, Miss Maheda really went after the longer bell. I like it, Bev.
Actually, we're having some technical difficulties. It's not intended to go on and on like that.
No, it's okay. It's good. It keeps me.
It alleviates all confusion.
Yeah, it's good.
We heard the bell. So Ms. Cohen, just very briefly to your last question, we will, our data, I think, is going to inform how we make sure that we're responding appropriately. I think we're all clear that one and dones for anything really doesn't change outcomes. It doesn't change culture. And so while we can't, you can't have a million balls in the air, we have to look at our data and say, right now, what are really the key pressing things that our data is saying that we've got to address and be very comprehensive in addressing to ensure that we have this safe and supportive learning environment for students and staff. So it's an evolution and ongoing breathing, living work that we're going to have to do.
Thank you, Ms. Rochester-Heiser.
Thank you. Actually, I'm really glad to hear what Ms. Cohen said, because that was one of my points around wraparound support. So I'm not going to repeat her part around sort of hate speeches and follow-up, but I wanted to sort of bring it to special education as well, right? And we know that disproportionality affects our special education students also. And so I'm wondering, in terms of either wraparound or follow-up support, what space is there, and perhaps Dr. Presidio may know this better, to work with Dr. Williams and you, Dr. Boyd, around our curriculum review in terms of where we have space to do some of this direct teaching wraparounds proactively, as well as reactively. And I'm thinking FLE, I'm thinking social skills curriculum and opportunities, not just for direct learning in small settings, but also opportunities to generalize that learning, proactively. So I guess that's my first question, to try to do some of this preventative work.
Dr. Presidio, I'll give you the floor first to be able to speak about any curricular connections to some of those things that Ms. Asmar-Heiser just shared, and then if needed, I can add on anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are really good recommendations. Those are things that we try to do currently, but we can always take a fresh look at and see where there are additional opportunities. I mean, we're certainly open to looking for, ways that we can more proactively communicate with our students about responsible behaviors, and be happy to take a look at that.
Thank you. I just posit that perhaps looking at perspective taking curriculum and so for students to have direct training on understanding, not just appropriateness, but what they may say or tones or other things may come across, I think would be very helpful. So, which gets to my other point around looking at intent in our SRNR, and really looking at our SRNR. And I've saw a few places, Dr. Boyd, where that was changed, and I appreciate it. I'm not trying to flag it all out, but there's a few places, and I'm just going to kind of point out page 30, section 2A5, in 7, there's a little space in there that I worry about intent. So like, for example, it states interference with educational process or open defiance of authority, right? And I think that in this section here, there may be some room to infuse a teasing out of intent, or at least a recognition of lack of intent in these sections here, as well as, maybe further defining what is substantial interference with educational process, what is open defiance of authority. Obviously, we want to make sure that our teachers are able to manage their classrooms and not have to deal with significant behavioral issues. But I also want to make sure that, there is understanding of when this is intentional interference versus non-intentional interference. And then the other piece of it, I wanted to mention around prescription drugs. On page 34D, I appreciate the way the SRNR has moved over the years in terms of recognizing prescription drugs versus, and how we're treating those a little bit differently in terms of severe consequences. But I'm wondering if there's space to look at students who regularly take prescription drugs versus infrequently take prescription drugs at school. Because right now, the process seems to require a note from a doctor. I've heard from many parents that, they get told by school staff, hey, just leave extra here in case the student forgets to take one at home or has to stay after school longer for some event and therefore needs to take medication when they normally would take it at home. And the barrier that this puts them on trying to get a doctor's note and or have extra prescriptions sitting around, which is pretty rare these days, is a barrier to that. So I'm wondering if there's space to look at how parents can have a little bit of easier process bringing intermittent use of prescription drugs for their students on these occasional basis. So you and I can talk more offline about that.
Thank you. We've written that down, and we will certainly follow up on that. And I think just to add on what Dr. Presidio shared about intentional defiance versus things or intentional disruptions versus things that may happen, or like he said, just students understanding what those implications may be. And I know we've kind of chatted offline about that, but that will really be some of the work that our special ed teachers and case managers are doing, because there may be some things that some of our students with disabilities are doing as for one form of communication, but it's perceived socially in a different way that could result in potentially some disciplinary action. So really making sure that that IEP process is going to be critical there, and understanding the present level and how we support students. And again, I know that's more individualized, but we'll follow up on that. But I just wanted to share that piece just to acknowledge that we understand exactly what you're saying with that regard.
I appreciate that. And if I could have a go back, please, Ms. Tolan.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd.
Ms. Dernak-Kofax.
Thank you. I do want to speak, Ms. McLaughlin had spoken to the issue about the
kind of the layman's language of the SR&R. And I believe, Ms. McLaughlin, since it's been so many years now, I think the old board did this probably in the 17-18 school year. And what I believe is the first 25 or 30 pages of the manual now. So I'm not sure, I know staff who was working on this was not here during that time. So you might rethink that this is just part of the manual, but this was all redone and done early on, whereas, the SR&R kind of technical language now starts in the middle of the book. So is that your intent now, to kind of keep it the way it was the last few years?
So at this time, we haven't discussed changes in the format. We know, I think the information Ms. McLaughlin was referencing, there are some quick guides, they're posted on the web and it's probably a 4 or 5 page document, that highlights some quick things for folks to reference. And then we have our family guide, and then there's the SR&R. So thus far, we haven't talked about reformatting it, but really talking about giving consideration to presenting the information in multiple modalities. So there's a variety of texts. So whether it's the quick guide, the family guide, the actual SR&R, that folks can, read, and it's a visual piece, but how can we perhaps support that information, auditorily, and even more simplified language? Could we provide scenarios or examples for things? We provide definitions, but sometimes examples or even non-examples are very, very supportive of folks' comprehension and understanding of what we're trying to convey. So again, we haven't, there's no master answer sheet right now. We're really opening the floor and opening the possibilities of what might we need to do. We might get feedback that says that the information that we have right now is digestible to stakeholders and families, and that they're good to go and don't need anything, and we can move forward with that. But until we really ask that information, particularly because of those overarching themes around consistency of implementation, and particularly to ensure that our students, because this is what impacts them the most, that they feel as though they understand what their rights are and what their responsibilities are when they're in school, and to a number of your points, even how some of their behavior outside of the physical school grounds could impact what happens disciplinary wise for school. So there's those pieces that we just want to make sure our students really understand.
Right. And yeah, and I'm sorry just to belabor this, but that was kind of the whole point of the way it looks now. And it didn't look like that before. What I got when I was a parent, and probably Miss McLaughlin in the early years of her kids as well, is you just got the letter and then the SR&R started. There was not that great amount of information about what attendance means, what bullying, discrimination, and harassment. So while that can always continue to be enhanced and updated, that was a big change that came within the last 4 to 5 years, I would say. So I just wanted to, because she had asked for that, I wanted to point that out. I also do want to talk about, and I kind of would like, staff doesn't need to answer this now, but I am thinking a lot about our consistency across the board, whether opt-in or opt-out. I still do have concerns about, opting in to the directories as we're talking about making these changes. But there were several things. The board truly felt that an opt-in version to family life education was not the best way to go for our students. And that's why we kept that opt-out version. And so I think when we think about consistency, the way we're looking at things, so I would like, staff to ponder that and think about that, because then it does become confusing. Oh, am I in this? Am I out of that? But there were real reasons, and I can talk, offline, because I don't want to take up other colleagues' time because it was a different issue. But we thought very carefully about that option. So I think as we move forward and making decisions, we need to think about that. And I appreciate your comments. Just finish my thought. I appreciate your comments in the chart about where we're going to be with the new law on marijuana and waiting on where we are going to be on the Supreme Court, which were my questions during the last work session. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bukarski is my fellow meeting manager today, so we will save our comments to the end. So Ms. Marin, you're next on deck, and then Ms. Bukarski.
Thanks, Ms. Tolan. I just have some comments to share with my colleagues. I feel like, you know, the process last summer, I remember being very immersed in it, and I'm glad to see that the motion that I made has lived on to this one. I really appreciate that chart, Dr. Boyd, that shows where each school board member's comments are. So thanks for that. So, you know, I think we did so much work last year. I think that was the day of like our longest school board meeting ever. I think it was almost 12 hours. So I appreciate all the extra comments as well. They're very valid, you know, a quick glance. But I do think that the comments I've shared, you know, about hate speech and some other topics have been incorporated. So I'm feeling very good about this policy. I think the biggest takeaway that I've learned through this process in the last few weeks and just talking with staff and my colleagues, or mostly staff and Dr. Boyd and also Dr. Williams is, you know, we can only write the policy so clearly. It's going to be up to human consumption and human training. So, you know, I guess I just say, let's not try to make everything we want or we think should be in there, because so much of this is based on human behavior, and there's a professional development component and the curriculum component and the family outreach component. So I think this is a really strong document that hasn't had the chance to really get used to its fullest extent due to COVID. So, you know, we did a lot of work last year. We're doing work now, and I'm feeling very good about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Ms. Bukarski?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Boyd and Dr. Williams, thank you for all the work that you did ahead. That was very much appreciated. And as I shared with you, really my overarching comment on this was the accessibility, was the stakeholder consumption and understanding, and how do we make this into a document or you know, usable for our families so that they don't just get it at the beginning of the year, put it somewhere, and then when something happens, because you know nobody thinks it's going to be my kid who is going to you know have issues. It just is not the mentality that most of us parents have. So I am really looking to see beyond the texts version of the SRNR. I like this idea of maybe some videos. I mean, just different ways, easy ways for parents to understand some of this, and then, you know, be able to maybe bring up the conversations with their kids. And I don't think that happens just from, you know, the booklet or summary. It has to be beyond the print form. So thank you for that. I did have a question around, this has come up a little bit, vaping and non-prescription drugs, especially. Vaping, it says that our first infraction, we send kids for intervention and help, and maybe school disciplinary interventions. But then the second violation, we have in-school suspension. And I'm really looking to understand, how are we supporting our kids, knowing that, you know, especially with vaping, it's not a one and done. Oh, we caught you, you did something wrong, now don't do it again. I mean, it's an addiction. So how are we supporting our kids so that we're working with that, you know, we're finding that balance and that fine line between consequences and support. So I don't know if there's a right answer to that, or if you've given that any thought, but yeah, I don't know what the in-school suspension will accomplish sometimes.
And I see that Deb Scott has her hand up to provide some feedback. Go ahead, Deb.
Well, as you're aware, we have the county and the board has supported our substance abuse misuse staff members in order to serve all of our regions and pyramids. That said, that also is a program that was interrupted by COVID. So we had probably a year and a half, and then we have interruption, but they are actively educating students about vaping. Our Fairfax County Health Department partners, right before COVID, that year before COVID, I think some of you saw a very well put together presentation by our Fairfax County Health Department on the dangers of vaping. The epidemiologists, the public health nurses from there, they really pushed out a lot of information to students, and they continue to partner with us as they are able now. And I expect as we get through the pandemic time, they are going to partner with us even more, because as you are saying, it's the education before the sanction that matters. We encourage and ask that our principals seek out our SAPs after a student has had a vaping incident at school, before, if we see that they are inclined to be vaping or taking other substances. So we do have a good program that has started and that was very supported by the board. And I believe it really started, I'm looking at Ms. McLaughlin because she can give me the date, but I believe it was the year I came aboard is when it really was started. And that's just 2 years ago. So those are some of the things we do and that we push out. If we were going to do more, we need to push it out to a younger age. That education going down into our elementaries with more education is something we need to do. And we need to make a push on that.
So thank you. And I agree. I mean, the education before kids start is extremely important, but I'm also very interested in what happens after, because there are kids who are addicted, for whom it is very difficult to quit, who do have family support. And I don't know that our current version of the SRNR supports those kids instead of punishing them for an addiction. So I will just leave that there. I know, Dr. Boyd, I didn't bring that up, but it is a topic of interest, and I would like, hopefully to kind of get some feedback to that.
Sure, thank you. And I think it's a good question. And I think it may be an opportunity for us to see how we can connect with community partners, because you're right, the class to divert against exclusionary practices, that's one thing. But if you're addicted, whether it's vaping, cigarettes, marijuana, alcohol, if you are addicted, one class is, that's to check the box so you can go back to sports or what have you, even if you have a desire to do so. So, I think we can all think about things we've tried to quit, whether it's eating certain, it just doesn't happen overnight. So how can we leverage community resources? Can we establish partnerships? If we can't establish partnerships, can we at least have resources to provide families with, so that they're not starting from scratch to say, hey, here's these resources in this area that can help and support those things. So we can look at that.
And if I could tag on real quickly, because I think that that's the exact right question. And now is the right time to be asking the question, right? Because as we try to pull apart, this larger question of, what's the role and purpose of discipline? The larger question of how we get kids connected to the right supports is equally as important, right? If it is a problem that is involving socialization, addiction, et cetera, then how do we leverage our mental health partners in a continuous way to get kids supports and understand the lived circumstances that might be driving some of those behaviors? I mean, this is not unrelated to the conversations that we're having contemporarily about our apparatus around policing, right? When should we call the police versus when we should call mental health clinicians, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a corollary that actually marries these things, but keeps them apart in terms of the schooling apparatus and outside, but the conversations are very similar. So thank you for raising that issue, because it's really important.
Deb Scott, do you want to add something?
I would just beyond the SAP program that we have rolling, the SAP program also allows for what's called a warm handoff to our county partners, the CSB. Many students do take and families do take advantage of that. The warm handoff is relatively new too, because it allows when we were in person, it allowed that CSB worker to really do an intake within the school with the family's permission and everybody on board with that. So it eliminated the family having to stop, get somewhere, and that type of thing. So there's a lot of details. I won't take our time today, but do know that that warm handoff, because of COVID, is also trying to be duplicated for mental health services. So a lot of exciting things have come, unfortunately, because of a pandemic. But when you are faced with those things, you move a little faster and you move a little quicker, and we all did. So yes, I like that you have brought it to the table today again. We have some more education to do. And that what also tells me is we need to push again out to our principals. What are all the steps and what's all available in mental health and in this arena of substance abuse?
Did I run out of time?
I think the bell did go off.
Yes, both staff and the board are out of time.
All right.
Ms. Tolan, this is Megan. I just have a quick process question.
Yes.
Thank you. I just, for the community watching, I wanted to make sure they knew what we were referencing. So the Community Service Board is our mental health services that comes through the county partnership. And then the SAPs are our substance abuse prevention counselors that, again, through the support of the Board of Supervisors, brought funded positions into our schools. So I know sometimes we get used to our shorthand, but I didn't want people in the public to not know about these two agencies and staff supports.
No, I appreciate that. Lots of acronyms. Okay, Ms. Amesh, I see your hand up. So why don't you go ahead and then I'll conclude.
Thank you so much. And thank you to staff for the overview and colleagues, obviously, for sharing all kinds of important points. I did want to ask, I know several folks were asking about, how we impart this on students as information, or do we have videos, et cetera. I was curious what ended up happening with the SRNR update. I know that we used to do, a video explaining to students what the various things were in a more fun kind of way. Fun fact, not so fun fact. I was an anchor for it when I was in school, but just curious where that left off.
I think so. We have some of our principals here, so this might be a good opportunity for our principals that are present to share how they provide information to their students and give updates to their students around the SRNR. So would any of our principals like to share? No pressure.
Dr. Noto.
Presentations for our students each year. We do them twice a year so that they understand some of the more common things that they should be aware of, like common offenses or things that might be new that they wouldn't know or wouldn't necessarily realize have changed. Like you said, it's a 60-something page document. They're not reading it cover to cover unless they're in trouble. So we try to preempt that with, we'll have like a lesson that we do during our advisory period.
Ms. Phillips, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say in terms of the updates this year, so typically what we started doing in the fall, we do the video that is produced by FCPS, but we also at our school have each grade meet with their grade level administrator. I think it's important for students to put a name with the face of the administrator that they're dealing with from the beginning of the school year. So we do face-to-face meetings with all students to go over the document and also answer any questions. And then as the updates, we create a video or a PowerPoint voiceover. And so this year with everybody being hybrid or in person or virtual, we ended up doing a voiceover PowerPoint that we shared through one of our learning seminars with all students, where our administrators revisited some of the key points of SRNR, as well as some of just the simple rules around Robinson and in our community, like how we do transitions in this environment would look like. But each year we recreate that video based on trends and information and the behaviors that we're seeing within the school and things that we really feel as an administrative team we need to remind students of as we go into the second part of the school year.
Thank you. Ms. Conley?
I would just add that we also do that presentation the same as Robinson. We do it at the second semester, and then we're getting ready to do it again just because we've brought in a number of students 4 days a week, and just some reminders of, some of the things that normally would not be things that we would need to worry about, but just trying to also keep the social distancing and some of those things in mind, just for students who haven't been in school for a while. So we tend to do 2, if not 3 or 4, just depending on what we're seeing, presentations throughout the year. And we also do it by grade level and administrator. We bring in our counselors as well and introduce all of our student services staff so that they can make those connections as well this year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think thinking about, from the administrative perspective, what's being done and worked on is really helpful. We may actually benefit from leveraging, Nathan and some students in kind of better understanding their, experience with this, and then seeing what room there is or what potential disconnect or not there is. I know for a number of students, this has been something that I've heard from them. And so I don't know, Dr. Boyd, if you've thought through maybe how we can solicit some of their input to think about better ways of doing this. I'm not saying that what we're doing now is not good. I think it sounds great, right, from what I'm hearing from our principals. But then why is that not being conveyed or received?
Sure, and I think, to our earlier discussion, we won't know we won't know what's working or what's not working in the perception of those on the receiving end until we ask them. And that's going to look, different from elementary to middle to high school and things like that. So we definitely will be engaging with students. And we want to make sure too, I know we have a number of mechanisms. We have student organizations and things like that, but we want to make sure that as we're getting feedback from a diverse student population. And when I say diverse, I don't mean just race, ethnicity, SES, but just, the continuum of students, so that our feedback isn't representing just one glimpse of our school division.
I think one of the things, Ms. Omesh, you're talking about, just going back, I'm not saying you dated yourself by talking about when you were a student, because that's been a while, right? I mean, but you're talking about too, when we do all of the administrators are doing their presentations, but there were a few years back or some years back where the kids, sort of parroting Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update, did their own version of an SR&R update with some commentary and some back and forth, but helped kids try to communicate to kids, hey, here's what's new in the SR&R. So something we can go back and at least certainly talk to Dr. Boyd as we have our new equity leads in each school is, how do we help communicate all of these changes? And this year we did a lot of changes, but frankly, we were so caught up in the pandemic, the messaging about all of this change in the SR&R may not be as fully received by some of our kids. I think that's one of the points you're making. And can we use our kids' voices as we keep focusing on elevating student voice to get the message out beyond just what the school is going to do? So we'll take that feedback back, and I'll see if I can pull up one of those older updates. No, seriously, to show Dr. Boyd and show Ms. Scott what that looks like. And maybe there's ways to recreate or do something new with the kids in a new way so that the message gets out through our students, in addition to what our staff and administrators are doing at each school.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, and it might not look like that either, by the way. We thought it was kind of lame and whatever. But when I say that, to say, I really think that when it comes to this piece, bottom up is going to be far more effective than us.
Right, that's the nugget. That's the nugget, right? That the kids had a role in it and they came up with something. At the time it was that, whatever it is. And so that message maybe resonated more. And this is frankly one of the most significant SR&R revisions that we've had in a generation here in FCPS. So how do we make sure it's not just being communicated one way, and bottom up is a powerful, powerful way to do it through the students. So thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the second piece of, my question is more big picture as well. I know in our regular meeting, I had outlined 3 things that I look forward to kind of seeing in the presentation today. One of those being our own reflections, Dr. Boyd, for you coming in new to the system, what things stand out to you, what vision we can have moving forward that's beyond just kind of tweaking for compliance, et cetera. And I say that, I know for this year, it's what it is, we're moving forward. For the following year, I think having COVID and not having implementation is actually an opportunity, because that gives us the chance to then rethink different pieces, and especially, in advance enough where if we want to do some of the really, deep rehabilitative work, or if we want to rethink for example, the categories of what's more serious than something else. Like I was surprised to see, for example, how we compare substance abuse versus gender-based harassment or, violence, et cetera. So that I would categorize that differently, but obviously there needs to be some thoughtful look at that. And if we want to think through more rehabilitative, restorative steps, even beyond what we've been doing, that's going to require structural, changes. We're going to think about resources, just like multiple departments have to be involved in that. So I'm wondering if, since we didn't see too much, if we can begin the conversations in a serious way now, so that we're prepared the next year. It's not going to just be language changes, right? It's going to have to be structural. But I'd love to hear a response to that.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Omesh. And you're absolutely right. I think as we continue our data dialogues regarding discipline, I think that it's going to, and also as we continue our work around equity and the plan that's coming out of Dr. Williams' office, I think it's going to highlight what are areas, as we look at what's the root cause for some of these things, areas for staff training, areas for student lessons, areas to engage our families that really go beyond just the VDOE codes around discipline, that really would be, really are going to be more supportive of really enhancing our learning environment, learning climate. And that's what this student rights and responsibilities overall is intended to do. That as we dig deep and kind of peel back the layers of the onion and the data really informs, oh, I thought we were doing this, but the data actually shows we're doing that. And then getting to, well, what's the reason for these things? Because we know just the behavior, that's just a manifestation of something else that is getting to the root cause. And so that's something that's not going to happen overnight. And then we have to be ready and prepared to engage in those courageous conversations, as Dr. Williams has helped us with, particularly as we look at our data, if it is impacting one particular student group more so than another. And again, I think that those are the ahas that we sometimes have to force us, to push us kind of off of our comfort zone to be able to engage upon that work. And so we're definitely, this is not, just a kind of keep driving along the same street, that we really want to evolve our work and make sure it's data informed.
Yeah, super quick, but big picture, Ms. Omesh, something that continues to come up, and Dr. Boyd has said it multiple times today, to do the proper implementation, we need the proper training. And we have still done short shrift for the amount of professional development that our teachers and staff need. I don't have the answer for you today, but I can tell you that we are having deep discussions in cabinet about what are some structural changes that we can make around how we've done professional development. And we may have some ideas for you to look at even before the school year comes. I don't have them now, but we can't do professional development on a shoestring or in the same structure that we've done and get the deep results that we want to see. So I don't have the answer yet, and I'm not saying it's a return to stuff that we just did in the past, but I do think it's looking ahead for the future and figuring out some new ways of doing our training of staff. And we'll have some ideas for this board, I hope, before the school year starts.
All right, I'm very happy to follow that last set of comments by Dr. Brabrand. One of the benefits, I guess, of going last is I'm looking at, I can really see how overarching and what a big picture opportunity we have in working just on the SR&R. Dr. Boyd, you mentioned earlier that not only do we have to train our principals, our APs and our DSSs, but our IAs and our office staff and our bus drivers and people in any situation that may come in contact with, a student that is, having a behavior issue. So I would really like it if we could go back and really think about if it's professional development, but then if we have an issue, what supports do those students need? We talked about community partners, but what other supports may we need in our school, given some of the changes that we're doing, and partnerships with agencies, et cetera. And there is probably a budgetary impact with that. And as was pointed out earlier, we're in the throes of our budget process right now. So now is the time to identify, especially next year, moving out of COVID and getting our kids into the schools, we're already talking about additional, emotional supports and things we may need for students. So how does this all tie together? And, how do we make sure that, we're being as efficient as possible, but yet giving our students and our staff the supports that they need. So I would really hope that the administrators that are on the call, other administrators are consulted, in the next couple of weeks as we think about what they really need to implement this. Also, just big picture too, I wanted to also talk about digital citizenship a little bit. I know we have a great program in IS for that, but that is, the technology and uses of, digital devices and the apps that, Karen Keys-Gamarra talked about is a concern. And, I'm hoping that we're working from across our IT department, across IS, across special services to identify these apps and what they are and, be out in the forefront in setting up additional digital citizenship coursework or whatever we need in order to stay in front of that and stay on top of that and, even be, making necessary changes to the SR&R as we move forward. So, big overarching comments, I guess, that we can continue to talk about.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think each person has had the opportunity for 3 minutes. So we'll start with 2-minute go backs and we'll just do as many as we need to do. I know Ms. Pekarsky was keeping close track of, I think most people want to go backs, but was keeping close track of who want to go backs. But I know Ms. Keys-Gamarra wanted to start off with the go backs. So we can start with that.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for mentioning the app, because that was my intent, is that there appears to be so much coming out that I could see kids getting into situations that they don't even anticipate, because some of these things really, for example, could make bullying easier or something to that effect. I'll start with my comment on special education students on page 52. I believe it was the second paragraph. It says that SPED students may be disciplined in the same manner as non-disabled students for up to 10 days. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I'd like to know how we are documenting this type of thing. Particularly with any students, school interruption is a problem, but I think especially with special education students, when you could have repeated interruptions, how are we monitoring that so that, while the child may not be having something over 10 days, they could have several 5 days that add up to way beyond the 10 days, which then impacts their educational experience. And so this allows that to happen. I'm wondering where the boundaries could be to try to make sure that we're not actually creating problems, educational problems, and inconsistency problems for these particular students.
Sure. So thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, for pointing that out. I'll share some information, and then this is probably another good opportunity for some of our administrators on the meeting today to share some of their school-based practices. You're absolutely right. When it says that students with disabilities can be disciplined, similar to their peers if they have up to 10 days OSS. Once we get beyond that, when it talks about change and placement, it could be a a series of short-term removals that are within proximity and similar related. So 2 days here, 3 days here, 2 days here. Once you add it all up, if it gets more than, once we exceed 10 days, and it does trigger responses regarding manifestation determination reviews, the provision of services starting the 11th day, all of those things. And so that is something that, and again, I'll let the building administrators speak particularly about the process in their building. But when we have multiple administrators in the building, we know we have the student information system, we have case managers, department chairs in secondary. We don't have department chairs in elementary, so that's a little plug early on, plug at elementary to help with that. But that's very important because you have multiple hands and you have the compliance piece where sure we need to make sure we're in compliance, but even above and beyond, and probably I would say more important, is the support that comes from that regarding what's the underlying cause for why these behaviors keep occurring that are resulting in out of school suspension. How are we supporting students' continuation on our IEP goals? How are we supporting their progress in the curriculum? And so we have to have very clear processes, and we have multiple administrators that could be addressing disciplinary infractions. So I would like to open the floor for our principals to talk about how they manage that and make sure that we're in alignment with making sure that the right responses, MDRs, provision of work are in place for our students with disabilities should they exceed that 10 days cumulatively, or if they're even long-term suspended. So if you could speak to that. Any volunteers?
I like the way you ask for volunteers.
Please go ahead, Dr. Noto.
Wasn't ready to raise my hand yet, but I will respond to that. I just hesitate to respond. I'll just speak for myself at Herndon. We end up having a lot of discipline cases at Herndon, but I staff an additional assistant principal there to help with it because we know that student behavior isn't just about the consequence, right? Like it's so much deeper than that. And that there's a reason that students are behaving the way that they are. And if you really want to allow that level of attention, you need to have people. So for us, we catch it. There's fail safes in place. Yes, the manifestation, like the 10-day limit, but we noticed it well before that. And, and I really think, that's for me, I feel like that's our responsibility. If I have a student who comes up on the radar a couple of times, getting suspended, that gives us pause, and it's a great conversation to have with a case manager or whoever else needs to be involved in that process. So, yes, there are rules in place and there are laws in place to help kids, but we staff it so that we notice it a lot sooner. I don't know.
It does. It sounds as though you have perhaps, is this a practice you put in place in your school, or is that something that is a part of our protocol?
So, I really couldn't speak to each school. Everybody has a different level of behavior needs. It really does depend on the student body. And for us, we have a lot of students transitioning into school who have not been to school for a long time. We have a large number of newcomer students who don't understand the normal structures of a school day. So, for us, we could spend all day just doling out consequences if we wanted to. So we just know we need another person to be able to manage it all. But I would argue, I don't know, I don't really want to speak for my colleagues, but I would say that we all are thinking about that regularly.
I guess, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Keith, come on.
Yeah, I think the purpose of my question is, I'm sure we have excellent leadership in many of our schools and all of our schools, but I'm looking for that consistency so that as these issues arise, we are making sure that the child isn't losing that access to education, and that is a circumstance that we have protocols for to protect that student. And so, I'm grateful to hear about, and I have one other thing to mention. So at any rate, that is where I was. That was where my concern was.
Thank you. We'll put you down again.
One of the things,
Ms.
one of the things, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, we do have from some years ago, the SOSAs at the high school level, those systems of support advisors that can really double down on doing some of that work that flag kids to be that early intervention. We have continued to look at refining the job description for that so that there is best practices across all of our high schools for that. And I know I see Ms. Conley there. I know one of the things pre-pandemic that middle schools were also talking about was wanting to see a SOSA at the middle school level, because when we look at discipline, it really takes off after elementary into that transition to middle school. So I know other board members are talking about the big picture of implementation. I do think one of the proactive things to look at as we move back in is how to look at resources to provision SOSAs at that middle school level and have conversations that help set those kids up for success as they transition again into high school, which is the next big vertical jump in discipline situations. That 8th to 9th grade year is the game changer years. Those 2 years really define whether a kid's going to get on a discipline track or not. So it's certainly something we can continue to have conversations with principals. I'll let them speak for themselves, of course, but with Dr. Noto talking about the additional AP, we did put in, the prior administration did put in a SOSA, and right before the pandemic, this was something middle school principals were saying, Scott, can we really take a deep look at this? And I think that need is going to be there as we come out of the pandemic to take another look. Thanks.
I just want to mention to my colleagues that you were sent the link to the next steps document this morning from Ms. Madeja. So please be using the document as well. And Mr. Frisch, did you have a?
Elaine, I did.
Principals are still talking.
I did see that Tracy and Cindy maybe wanted to add. I know you want us to keep it quick, and I talked too much on that one, but I don't know.
No,
Cindy,
that's okay. I'm seeing them now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was just actually, it's funny, I was going to speak to the SOSAs and Dr. Ray stole my thunder. I do think that the SOSAs are key, and it is vital for the consistency across of our buildings. And I think that the training they receive, they get centrally. And so they're all getting the same training. They're bringing it back to us and our administrative teams, and we're learning from them on different restorative practices. I will say the middle school SOSA is key, and that transition being in a secondary building, I see it firsthand from that 8th grade to the end of 9th grade, like which track they're going to go down. And like Liz, we have not necessarily staffed, but kind of staffed. We've created a resource teacher position that serves as our middle school SOSA. And so he participates in all those trainings with our high school SOSA because we have seen the need for it and the benefit that we're getting in that same work across both levels at the middle school and the high school. So I think that that's a key piece in that consistency that you guys are speaking about.
And I would just add that through our MTSS process, we really do have almost case managers as we start to see students who might be making some inappropriate decisions or not the best decisions as we see them maybe amping up or making some questionable choices. We work with their teams or their counselors or anyone in our student services department to kind of help guide them back on track. We have a variety of interventions that we put into place. So we do catch them through either case managers or more of an informal non-special education, non-education case manager. But we do have a lot of means to kind of catch students before they fall too far. I would say that, you know, I would love to advocate for the SOSA. I think that transition from elementary to middle and then middle to high, we know if they're not successful in 8th grade, getting up into 9th grade and not getting out of 9th grade on time, that graduation, you know, chances get smaller and smaller. So having the additional staff to support, I just do want to thank you for allocating the full-time school social worker or school psychologist. That has been significant in our building. And I don't think we could have the MTSS process that we do and intervene as quickly as we have without that. So I do want to thank you for allocating that in the budget over the last few years.
Thank you very much for that input. Mr. Frisch.
I'm good for now. I might want to go back at the end, but I'm okay for now.
Okay, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I was talking about disproportionality and how that data is analyzed at the school sites. So Dr. Boyd, can you give me a sense of what happens when that data is provided to the schools with the principal, well, maybe the principals can speak to that in terms of how that is reviewed and discussed and what expectations, how does this make it into a particular school's school improvement plan, or does it? I would like to have some information on that. Thank you.
Sure. And Deb, prior to the principal sharing, would you talk about the process that our former equity coordinator stood up regarding the disaggregation of discipline data?
Oh, I think I'm frozen.
You're fine, Dr. Anderson.
Okay, then maybe somebody else froze. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
I can now. I don't know if the lapse was mine, but everybody had frozen for a while, but please go ahead.
So yes, I was asking Deb Scott to share the process that our former equity coordinator stood up regarding the disaggregation of discipline data. And then certainly want to open the floor to principals to talk about how that data is used at their schools, perhaps what additional supports they need regarding that process. So go ahead, Deb.
Yes, we were able to give buildings risk ratio data this year. So that was a help to them, I hope. I know this was a different kind of year to try to look at behavior data, but they do have the risk ratio data that was published by Carrie Williams before she left FCPS. We also have, we're having quarterly data dialogues with RAS and EPs so that they could look at overall discipline data in their region. And that was something that we implemented and carried out. And then we added the restraint seclusion data with that as well. So we have some data sources now, and also keep in mind that we did pilot the referral system that was purchased 2 years ago. It is out in a pilot and it will be in all schools. So that is going to give principals yet another tool at their building level to look by teacher, by student, and make some decisions about the supports they need within their school.
Thank you. Did any of the principals want to share anything?
I think Ms. Barnes has her hand up. Principal Barnes?
Oh my goodness, was I frozen again?
I'm not sure. Margaret, did you want to make a comment? Might have to come back to Margaret. One of the things, if I could just make a comment on that last piece, and then we'll see if other principals. Let's just be candid with one another. We had a decentralized data collection system for discipline. We now have done, for the first time ever in this system, a centralized data collection system for discipline. This is going to put power at the school level, but at the system level, to more quickly address discipline disproportionality and put the resources in place to do intervention and prevention. So I am very, very excited about this work, and I think it is going to be a game changer. 20 years ago, we were talking about trying to capture the data. When Dr. Dominich was here in the 90s with Target 9, I remember because I was a young administrator. We didn't have the data systems then. We didn't have them just a couple of years ago, and we will be putting the data system in that will give us a chance to truly tackle this problem, not just at a schools level, but at a systems level. And I am very, very confident that our principals and our central office staff are ready to use this to help us drive down discipline disproportionality in an even more dramatic way than it has been done before. Margaret, did you want to say something? I see you video on.
Yes, yeah, I don't know what's going on with my desktop today. I had to switch to my phone. I'm sorry about that. And I was in a faculty meeting, which is why I was here at the beginning and then had to pop out. So thank you for inviting us to be part of the conversation. I wanted to speak specifically to this because we did do some of this work at homes this year. And what I'm really excited about that division-wide referral system is I feel like the conversation with teachers is most powerful at the referral level, because we looked really deeply at our SIS discipline, like what we entered as administrators and how that broke down by gender, by race, by grade level. But we were also, because we had an internal referral system at schools, we were able to break down the data by teacher and by gender, by race, by grade level. So we were able to have data dialogues with individual teachers and found that it was really a small group of teachers doing a lot of referrals. What were some of the mindsets and beliefs that were underlying and leading them to the referrals? What were the steps that they took before they referred a student, and reminding them of all the supports that we have in place? So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about the fact that we will have a referral that we can also pull data from so that we can do that intensive work with the teachers. And that was part of our SIPs this year.
Thank you so much, Ms. Barnes. Actually, you echoed something that I mentioned in my first turn, which is when we look at data at its micro level, we tend to see that it is coming just from a very few, from a select group. And so I'm glad that you were able to, at least at your school, to identify it and to have some interventions and supports around that. And I think that's something that we should be able to do all around FCPS, because you're exactly right. The referral point, that's the point at which everything begins. And if we can manage, I'm not saying to not refer students, but just to be sure that every other aspect has been exhausted when they need to be. I think that's really important. So thank you for sharing that. I don't think I heard the other piece of my question, which is, you mentioned at homes, it makes into your SIP. Do we have any idea of what happens at other schools generally, Dr. Brabrand, or are we progressing in this adventure since we now have a centralized system? What were the expectations prior to this new system?
In terms of what? The expectations in terms of what, Dr. Anderson?
How school disaggregates and analyzes their data and how they respond to it.
Well, what I would say, Dr. Boyd, I don't know if you want to make a comment first, and then maybe I'll make a comment afterward.
Yes, and again, as Ms. Scott shared, we're transitioning, but I think the big piece is that while some schools may be further along, we're excited that Ms. Barnes, she's digging into her data, they're having a discussion, she's looking at the teacher referral data and all of that good information. But I think that now that we have this centralized system, we will have to make sure we're clear about expectations, but before we can be clear about expectations, we have to make sure we're providing the requisite professional development. We can't assume that everybody knows how to do this work. And so we're gonna have to partner very closely with our professional development office, our equity office, to really talk about what does it look like to unpack discipline data. We know there's a number of trends that we can look at, types of infractions, time of day, or there's certain staff members that we're seeing that are certain things, but it's more than just numbers. And then once we peel back all those onions, who's being impacted by certain disciplinary infractions. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, and have to recognize that our schools are on various places on this continuum, but we have to be very purposeful and strategic about the guidance and the support that we're going to provide to clarify those expectations.
Dr. Anderson, if I could bring in the RAS voice of Becky Bainig for a moment, I think that would be very helpful for board members in the community to hear about what our region assistant superintendents have done around this issue of expectations and follow through on discipline. Becky? Ms. Bainig, are you here? Dr. Ivy, did you want to make any comments about the RAS? I know, you have worked with them on that. Do you want to make any comments? I don't see Becky here.
Oh, okay. Sure, I can comment. I would say that you asked what was happening prior. And so we were having quarterly data dialogues, and we're working with the RAS, the region office staff, and with the DSS and the equity team. And we were looking at discipline data and beginning to unpack that. One of the concerns that came up was the inconsistency of reporting and that consistent discipline form, which I think will be a true game changer. We have not continued those dialogues this year because of our current situation. And we anticipate that next year we definitely will get those scheduled and we'll follow up.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. If I may push back a little bit more, Dr. Boyd, at the top of this conversation, you talked about shall versus should versus would. So I would love to dig into a little bit in terms of what is that plan moving forward now that we have opportunity to avail ourselves of this tool, which is going to provide robust information for school staff to react to. I'd like to get a better sense of what is that going to look like, particularly through the PD lens that you just discussed. The last comment that I want to make is I hear you, the plug for the special education chairs. This was something that I championed when we first got onto the board last year, and then the COVID budget came and changed the outlook, and we have not been able to return to that conversation. I even think this year's been a little stressful to do that as well, but it's not something that's lost on me. As a former elementary school principal, this could possibly be a major game changer. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Ms. McLaughlin.
Great. Dr. Braybrand, I appreciated what you said, that this is a transformative SR&R, but I do want to give credit to the two prior boards and your predecessor, Dr. Karen Garza. When I joined the board 9 years ago, we did not have a mindset of discipline was to teach. It was discipline to punish. And it was the two prior boards that really focused on making sure we reduced out-of-school suspensions, that we really focused on parent notification, that we stopped calling our discipline hearings expulsion hearings, where we know young men took their lives thinking they were going to be expelled, that we really wanted to look at how we could get better on our first possession marijuana diversion, like the juvenile court system was already ahead of us on. We also looked at our hearings office letters. The culture of those letters were very alarming and frightening, frankly, to families. And so the focus on how could we have those letters not be so traumatizing to students and families. And I do hope, Dr. Braybrand, we haven't really talked about it today, but I know that our former hearings office director did retire or leave the system. And I'm not sure who you hired to be to take on that new role. But the restorative justice circles as well was another key change. And I want to applaud you again. You have brought your caring culture mindset to this work, absolutely. And I do think that this board, I'm so excited at how every single one of you has embraced the importance of how we really get to the point of discipline is to teach. I want to applaud our principals who have joined in this chorus of understanding that discipline is to teach. And we certainly want to, as a board, focus on how to support your work. And Laura Jane Cohen really brought that to task at today's conversation. So I do hope, Dr. Braybrand, you'll just let us know finally how we can get back to having an annual hearings office report to the board and how we can get these quarterly discipline reports, because the board also wants to see and monitor the progress. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Dr. Braybrand, I'd asked about the hearings office.
The hearings office, we haven't hired the director yet. The chief equity officer does have that, is one of the things. to do, but she wants to take her time and get the right person in this moment that we're in. And you're correct. The prior boards have built the foundation, but I think we're in the middle end is not just really a transition as much as an acceleration of the work that has started. So, and
you know, I have been 9 years on this topic, and Dr. Williams, I would be happy to give you historical input on how we can continue to get better.
Yeah, and as Dr. Ivy just said a minute ago, the quarterly data dialogues will return as we return to school fully in person in the fall. And we'll keep you updated on both those matters of the hearing office and the data dialogues.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Ms. Cohen.
I'm so grateful for that hearings office head update. I appreciate Ms. McLaughlin bringing that up. I had a couple of questions just to piggyback a little bit on when we talked about disaggregating our data. Are we also using the information that we're getting from the Fairfax County Police Department on arrests that's broken down by schools?
Yes, so we have that report. And again, our numbers and our reports were, very, very small on this year. But we will continue to disaggregate that data and to look at what are the things that our students, looking at it twofold. So we're clarifying our language so that the things that we have to report are explicitly clear and that we're only reporting those things which we are required to report. And then within that, really just to unpack it to say, where are our kids, where are we having to make those connections, and then the community resources, how might we be able to support that? Again, even if it's things that are happening outside of school, how can we support students and families for the long-term outcome of them being, positive contributing citizens, that don't have this, records and things like that. So looking at those pieces.
Yeah, definitely not walking out of schools with arrest records would be ideal. But also to me, I think it's really important in the conversations then that we have with our delegation, because I think we were all able to contribute a lot of information to helping get rid of this disorderly conduct piece in code that we saw routinely being used, in a very disproportionate way against our students of color. And so I think not only does it help inform us, but then we can help kind of inform in a more general sense on a legislative, in the legislative arena. My other question was, what role do our students play in developing the SRNR? I just, when we were talking, when Ms. Pekarsky was talking about vaping and how we certainly don't ever want to be in a position to punish addiction. I look at what our students have been doing this year, and particularly their advocacy around mental health, and what kind of avenues and forums do we have for them to be able to inform what we do around SRNR?
So we're going to be reaching out to our student, various student groups again for the initial update of the SRNR. We hadn't recommended really many changes because, it was still kind of like that last year's SRNR, for lack of a better phrase. But we will be engaging in student discussions, family, staff, all of those different stakeholder groups as we address some of these more substantive issues that we're taking up on this year. Because again, this impacts them the most. If it's who does the SRNR impact most heavily? It's students. And so we want to make sure we have their voice and aren't thinking for them or thinking about when we were kids, because things have changed.
Yeah, I think definitely some of those equity town halls that we had this past summer, in my mind, were pretty illuminating for me. Even though I am the parent of teenagers, it was, hearing that and going back and having those conversations of, is this happening in your schools? And then saying yes and helping that inform the process. I would love to see more of that. And if I can be helpful with any of that, please let me know.
Thank you, and will do.
Thank you. Racha?
Thank you. And, once again, Ms. Cohen takes some of my ideas. I think it's wonderful that she has such great ideas. And so I don't have as much to share. So thank you, Ms. Cohen, for sharing some of that. Although she looks frozen to me now too. So I don't know if it's just me or or what. So anyway, I won't take up too much time. I wanted to sort of circle back. I know we're probably going to talk about SROs in a different conversation, so I don't want to talk about the conversation. But on page 41, it does talk a little bit about the role of SROs, and I wanted to, and stay on the same wavelength I was on before. When it talks about using SROs for removal of an unknown substance, I think there's some room here to clarify at what point the SRO needs to get involved in that, as opposed to school staff first, right? And I bring this up in the perception of removal of an unknown substance may or may not involve physical touching of a child in that removal process. And when you have special education students who react differently sometimes to being touched, that can unintentionally, there's a difference when that reaction is done with a police officer than with a school safety officer. And one of the ways that we have disproportionality in the criminal justice system is on those unintentional reactions that can be, with a police officer seen as assault. And so I think there's space there for concern about clarifying exactly, when that happens, as well as interference with the school process that impedes the safety of others. I think that's a fairly vague statement. And so I just think there's some room there when we're talking about getting SROs involved to make sure we're really clear on those pieces of it, especially anything that may involve the touching of a student that can then lead to a reaction that may not be intentional. And then I think maybe there's even some room here on sort of, is there a first step in some of these places of school safety first and then SROs in some of these processes, especially when it's unknown substance. That was the extent of my time, but I'll follow up with the other small things, but specific things like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dernak-Kopak.
Thank you, but I have nothing additional at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Amish.
Thanks. The only thing I'll add is this theme of just the long-term thinking and what we're going to spend our time doing moving forward. It might require us to actually consider ways that we come together as a board to think differently or to review things, or staff, if you guys have things as we move forward over the course of the year, in advance of it being the official SR&R process, where we're tweaking language to reflect kind of the more structural pieces that we're thinking about. So I just want to put that out there, because I do think in being intentional about it, it's going to be more than just, like fixing the language of a book, right? So that's all. Thanks.
Will do, and thank you.
Okay, so we have gone through each board member. Ms. Keith Gamara, I think you had one more comment. I think that was maybe the only person that I thought needed some additional time. So Ms. Keith Gamara, if you have an additional comment, now would be the time. And if anyone does need an additional go back, you can just raise your hand. Ms. Keith Gamara, are you with us? Ms. Amish, do you want to go ahead? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I realized I'll just finish my time. The other thing I was going to say to my colleagues, I think in advance of the SRO conversation, which I know is not directly related, but has come up obviously in these conversations, I'm curious about what work we're going to try to do to inform ourselves of the issue. I'm really trying to preempt what may be potentially a challenging set of conversations based on different lived experiences, maybe different, factual backgrounds on the topic, and even maybe, backgrounds in equity, cultural responsiveness, et cetera. I'm curious, Dr. Williams, if you want to weigh in here as to your thoughts on what you would recommend or encourage. I do think we have to be proactive and intentional here as a board to kind of catch ourselves up to speed on what's really a national conversation, and potential move away from, certain ways of thinking. But yeah. Please, Dr. Williams.
Of course, and actually thank you for the question, because I think it is, again, for me, there are a lot of right questions being asked today. And what I would say is, before we have a conversation about SROs, if we could spend some time thinking about like what is the function that we want SROs to perform for our schools and for the division. Because my experience is that SROs are victims to a degree of creep, right? We brought them in for one reason, and now they do almost anything under the sun, much of which is not the intended purpose. To conflate that, to go one step further rather, is to think about what makes a school safe and be willing to hear the multiple perspectives of different stakeholders, because different student groups perceive SROs in different ways, right? And have different experiences. And so this question of what is, what makes a school safe and what are the different ways we can go about ensuring that safety is another question that I think we should have some clarity on before we start to enter the conversation about SROs. So I thank you for putting that forward, because I think if we came in willing to focus on those two things, then figuring out the roles that we would want SROs to serve in, and then crafting MOUs in a way that speak to that and liaising with the police department, it makes the work a lot easier. But if we're not clear, then we miss opportunities.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it speaks to, I don't know, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Pekarsky, as we plan ahead in advance of decision-making on an issue like this, I do think, we're gonna wanna probably reach some common ground, discuss what our values are around this. And then as Dr. Williams pointed out, what we wanna see, where certain things have deviated from the role, et cetera, what role we see to be played. So I just put that out there again, colleagues, and to, chair and vice chair. I really think this is gonna be one of those that we have to have some advanced conversation about.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, I see your hand up.
Unmuting my mic. I just wanted to reinforce something that my colleague Abramish said, and Laura Jane Cohen also picked up on it, that when we are talking about who we're serving and serving students, when we look at ways that other board members have talked about, how do we address vaping? How do we prevent vaping? How do we provide interventions for vaping? It is going to need to be that two-way dialogue and really getting those student focus groups so students can say to us, how do you best reach us to understand whether it's digital citizenship, whether it's the risks of social media and sexting, whether it is how do we make sure that kids say, this is how I hear, and better learn from what the SRNR is, and then also just what are the things we can do to have them be partners in that. And I know Dr. Brabrand, you were great in saying your support for that, but I wanted to really put a fine point on it. I'd like to see this be in the upcoming year, so that a year from now, when we're sitting here talking about SRNR changes, we really know how we've captured student voice through focus groups, surveys, and other things. And then I just want to thank Dr. Williams, how well you spoke to the issue of SROs in our schools. It has always, again, concerned me that schools are there to teach, and we want safe schools, but we don't want the creep, as you noted. I do think we need to know the history of SROs when they were first placed into our schools. We should have all the details on the funding that's involved, because as I said at the prior business meeting, we spend all this money putting SROs into our schools, and we don't put this same level of funding for school nurses that often are trained to be able to identify addictions and and other behaviors in students that could be more preventative in nature. So I look forward to more of that work and conversation as well.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Pekarsky, did you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly, I just wanted, we kind of talked about this, and I brought it up with the vaping, but another one that I wanted to include in the conversation is how we handle students, especially our older students in particular, maybe, having non-prescription drugs, that can be something as benign as bringing 2 Advil to school because they broke their leg and, they didn't know, their parents didn't have time, whatever, to go to the office and do the form. And now they brought it to school. And I think, if my memory serves me right, the discretion that the principal has in a first-time offense for something as benign as this, I think is even up to 2 days in-school suspension, which just does not, to me, seem appropriate. So I don't really want to get into too much further because it's part of the larger conversation, but I wanted to put it on your radar as another one of those points where, are we really serving the purpose of teaching and creating safe school environments, or just looking for reasons to punish? And especially when you have that discretionary part of this, a principal can say, oh, well, so-and-so, okay, you get off with this punishment or consequence, but this kid, you're going to get the 2 days suspension. So I worry about that. And it was in a few different places in the SR&R, especially when we were talking about drugs and alcohol. So just wanted to flag it for you as another point for consideration.
Great, thank you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I thought I saw you flash up. Did you have a remaining question? Maybe not. I just wanted to make a comment around the SRO topic as well. Dr. Williams, I do really appreciate the explanation that you gave us. And I just want to mention, as part of that, I would really like to see community input as well. And in community, I'm using the word very broadly. Parents, students, our entire community, and feeling safe around schools. I think that's probably what you were talking about when you were talking about how do we define what is safe. So I appreciate that. Look forward to those conversations. With that, I think we have concluded our staff input. I wanted to give our board input and questions. I wanted to give a huge thank you to our staff for the work that they did putting this together. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Pekarsky, to just kind of tie this meeting up for the day.
Yeah,
thank you, everyone.
Just wanted to say thank you to everyone. And again, to staff who's worked so diligently on this. And the conversation is still continuing. And I know Dr. Boyd will be in contact with us and be providing more information as we are working towards voting on the SR&R. And please do direct any questions you have to her. Ms. McLaughlin, do you have a question?
Just process-wise, so it was mentioned the next step document for board members. So I don't like to click over to the next step document during the work session. I'm trying to listen and to my colleagues and staff. So can you give us an idea of how much time we have to review the next steps and add anything on there, like tomorrow at 9 a.m. or something?
No, that's a good question. Dr. Anderson, if it's okay with you, can we leave it open until, I guess, Wednesday morning before chairs? So I guess maybe tomorrow night, early Wednesday morning. Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Thank you, everyone.
Ms. Pekarsky, I was giving a thumbs up, but please, there's one more piece. It's not just adding the next steps, but it's also getting consensus on the next steps. Staff does not work on them if we do not have a majority of the board identifying them. So we need a cutoff for adding them, and then we need a cutoff for board members to act on them. And I know Ms. Malberg and myself, we've tried kind of maybe on Tuesday night, send a quick reminder, go and offer your consensus, because then on Wednesday morning, we need to be able to get started right away. So I would say let's remain with what we've done so far, which is 9 a.m. tomorrow, so that by Tuesday night, people can offer the consensus, because they need to see the entirety of what's being posted. So they will need that time.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And
Thank you.
we
So-
probably do need to stay consistent on this, which I guess is something that we need to talk about. Yes,
Yeah.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Yeah, Ms. Pekarsky, what I was going to say is it's great that we all put in whatever input we want there. I just want to make sure board members understand, because I have seen this happen. Board members visit the document once. And so they put in their input, they vote on whatever is there, and they don't revisit it when other things get added behind their own. So I do think we'll want to have that clarity of by tomorrow 9 a.m., put your ideas up. But then board members really do need to look at it after 9 a.m. tomorrow to make sure they've weighed in on all of the things that are there.
And either myself and, oh, I'm so sorry. May I?
Yeah.
Either myself or Ms. Mulberg will send a reminder after 9 a.m. for board members to revisit it, because Ms. McLaughlin is exactly right. Sometimes we don't have that second piece be adhered to by everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's best, Ms. McLaughlin, if after our work session, everything is still fresh in our mind, if people can just go do it right away, don't let it linger, and then people have the chance to look at it, and we can, you know, the longer we sit on things, the less we remember what happened in a work session, and the more creative we may get on what we want, I think, for next steps. But anyway, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Ms. Tolan, for this work session, and thank you, board members. Really appreciate it. And I want to just thank Dr. Boyd again and her team. Great job, Dr. Boyd and your team.
Thank you.
Well done.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.